Hello, everybody. I'm going to wait a couple minutes here before we get going. People are still filtering in, but welcome to our 13th, amazingly enough, performance thinking webinar. We've been doing this for over a year now, and I'm really excited about this one, actually. I always am, but this one in particular, for a whole set of reasons, really. First of all, it turns out we'll be sort of honoring Dr. Roger Kaufman, who perhaps coincidentally passed away exactly 1 year ago tomorrow. And I'll tell you more about Roger and his influence on this work. But it's kind of an honor, really, to remember his contributions and all the advice that he gave me, basically. Secondly, also, I want to introduce myself a little bit. I usually don't do this because most of the folks that arrive at this webinar already know about our work. They might already know about me, but for the sake of people who might be involved in areas like public safety and so forth, I thought you might want to have a little bit of background about who this guy is that's even talking about this. I was a philosophy student back in college, and I thought I was interested in the big ideas. You know, I was interested in how people, how we could help, basically. And but then I got turned on to the behavior science of B.F. Skinner. And I was stunned by the fact that his science offered a kind of an elegant way to address many of the very issues I was interested in philosophically. And through kind of a coincidence, and after a fan letter that I sent to Dr. Skinner, he invited me to study with him in the doctoral program in experimental psychology at Harvard, and which I did, and spent the first 10 years of my career in the 70s doing instructional research and early program instruction work, and then shifting to a field called precision teaching, working in a laboratory, but also managing a classroom, teaching people who were had severe disabilities. And one of the great things about that, besides the fact that we helped them, was that we learned that if our instruction was not well designed, they would not learn anything. And so we had to be very good. Toward the end of the 70s, however, two of my main mentors, Henry Pennypacker and Ogden Lindsley, essentially kicked me out of precision teaching and said, we think we need to go private. We need to expose ourselves to the contingencies of the marketplace to see how our science can be best applied in ways that people will understand and appreciate and pay for, basically. And Dr. Lindsley in particular wanted me to take what we'd learned from precision teaching into the corporate world. So I did that starting in the early 80s, and I got involved in areas such as sales performance, customer service, factory maintenance, process improvement, and so forth, and had a couple of consulting firms that I started and headed up, actually, and spent most of my career devoted to that kind of work with leading teams of consultants in a whole variety of different environments, both in the United States and elsewhere. And then about 15 years ago, the sort of methodology that we now refer to as performance thinking, that we'll be talking about a little bit today, had kind of emerged in our work. And so we decided to basically start the current firm, the Performance Thinking Network, devoted to teaching other people how to improve performance. Now, the reason that might be relevant is that the issues that I see in many public and societal issues are reflected in organizations as well. And so when we talk about the fact that, for example, some people think of as training as the primary solution, you might understand why, as somebody who comes from a world where that mistake is often made, I would be very interested in sort of applying what we know to societal issues. So that's a little bit of my background and sort of, if I'm qualified at all, how that kind of brings me here. But let me begin with a set of slides, and here we go. This is the slide that you saw when you entered the room, presumably. Performance thinking for mega or societal challenges. And there you see Dr. Kaufman. He was a friend and mentor, and many of the people in our field, some of you who are here, I'm sure, know what a generous man he was. We had significant disagreements along politics, and we could always talk about them. He was quite a conservative, and I'm a bit on the liberal end, but we could always talk about those in a civilized and gentlemanly way. And that smile in this particular picture, I think, reflects the kind of energy that Roger brought to so many people and so many things. Before we jump into this session, though, I want to tell you, if you're not already aware of it, is we have a YouTube channel. Performancethinking.tv is the best way to get there. And it has a whole lot of little video bits on it, as well as our recorded webinars. So you can learn a lot more about the stuff there. I also want to mention next month's webinar. It will be called Get Out of the Training Box. We've had a white paper devoted to that topic for quite a few years now. But it's really very specifically for my colleagues who are training and development and performance improvement professionals, because there's this challenge in organizations that we tend to be held in to just doing training, even though we may develop the skills and capabilities to look at other kinds of interventions that will increase the return on investment for those interventions. So it's a whole topic. You can register for it, and if you've already registered for this webinar, of course, you'll be automatically registered for that one. We've got some other ones coming up. We've done some work with HR business partners that we wanted to talk about. A topic that may not come for a while, but we've been working with a colleague of ours, Peter Doms, who's a strategic planning guy, and we want to talk a lot about how to make strategic plans more executable. And then there's a hot topic, learning in the flow, one of those current sort of whatever flavors of the year that people talk about it, and sort of how do we want to look at that. And our colleague, I think we're going to be joined by a colleague of ours from Amgen Corporation on that topic. And then agile talent development and lots more. But anyway, there's a lot more coming. The other thing I want to mention is if you want to tell anyone about registering for these webinars, you can go to our homepage at performancethinking.com, or also sixboxes.com will get you there. And if you click on this thing that says Performance Thinking Free Monthly Webinars, it will get you to the registration page. So I'd like to learn a little bit about who's present. And by the way, I want to offer an apology for having delayed this a week. I had some minor surgery, some nasal passage surgery that was positioned as being minor, but it actually took considerably longer than expected to really recover from it. So last week I just wasn't prepared to be able to do the webinar, and I apologize if that was inconvenient for people. In any case, let me open up this poll, because I'd like to know a little bit more about who is present here. And let me connect to start it. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. There it is. So what? Oops. Hold it. Just a second here. I'm going to make it so that you can see the results. Okay, here we go. So I'm interested in who's present. And so if you could select the item, it's a rather long list that best describes your area of expertise or your job. Are you a training and performance professional? Are you a human resource person? Are you involved in leadership or management or supervision in a sort of a line of function? Are you perhaps involved in clinical or educational practices? Some of our colleagues are in the behavioral health world. Are you possibly, I don't expect that necessarily here, although I'm hoping that the recording will be accessible to people in civic or government leadership or social policy or law enforcement. You may also be an academic, a researcher. So it looks like most people, as one might expect, are training and performance improvement professionals here. And we've got a few organizational leadership folks too. So thanks for completing that. It's not a surprise who was present, but I wanted to be sure that I had some sense of who's here. So returning to the slides, there's also a document that you can download, which I will make available here. And I think you can see it now. It's called Reimagining Public Safety. And it has something to do with, and I'll be talking a little bit about this, but it kind of summarizes thoughts from quite a few months ago, actually, but that I think are consistent with and sort of summarize some of the things that we'll be speaking about today. So I thought you might be interested in that, and you can download it at your convenience while I'm speaking. So here's the agenda for today. I want to talk a little bit about Roger and about, or at least about Roger's contributions. And he was known for strategic planning, for needs analysis, for being a real giant in the performance improvement world. But his focus, what he, I think, probably is most known for, is what he called MEGA, the notion that contributions that we make in organizations, plans, strategies, should always also be somehow aligned with societal benefits, societal results. I want to talk a little bit about that. Then talk about how we adapt our performance thinking models and logic to that, and how we think we can approach issues around societal or mega topics. One of the challenges in every organization, but also in society when we're trying to address issues that are challenging, is often that the interventions are siloed, that basically people are in their departments, in their functions, in their groups, and they don't actually collaborate or align all that well in many cases. And so then I want to talk a little bit about how we might apply this in the area of public safety, which is a current topic of some interest. I want to say up front, I'm not an expert at all in public safety. And so I did not select this topic because for that reason, although I have a colleague who is present here, who will remain unnamed, but who has helped me with this a little bit, and who is, and I've spoken with some people interested in these topics. But primarily my interest in this presentation is to show you how we can provide a framework for looking at solutions in a more systemic way than tends to happen. And I'll unpack that in a while. And then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for sort of Q&A. So, you know, Roger wrote a lot of books and a lot of presentations, but one of the statements, the questions that he asked often that I think highlighted the mega message was, what kind of world in measurable performance terms do we want for tomorrow's child? And so he talked about levels of planning, levels of objectives, starting with micro, which tends to be at the level of individual performers or teams, and then macro, which is looking at a whole organization, what can we do, or what does the organization need, or what are our strategies organizationally, and then mega, which was about societal benefit. And Roger had a lot of stories about this, but I always think of them as, especially some decades ago, because he started talking about this a long time ago. You know, he would go to senior leaders in big companies or in government agencies and say, you know, you need to keep in mind when you're doing your strategic planning and your needs analysis, contributions to societal benefit. And as he described it, people would kind of often say, well, Roger, you know, we're in business to make money here. We're not tree huggers. And so back in those days, you know, that was apparently a common response. But of course, now you look at companies, Apple, for example, which is proud of the fact that all of the energy it uses for its entire company is renewable energy, or companies that are making big efforts to use recyclable materials, or companies that are now, of course, focused in ways that we hope will make a difference on diversity and inclusion. So mega has become a thing in a big way now, and Roger had something to do with that, without a doubt. The way we think about this, and I want to unpack it after I sort of give you the overview, is that in our approach, which is accomplishment based, which focuses on the products of people's behavior, we can define those accomplishments at any level we want. We can talk about what individuals produce, or what processes or whole organizations produces, or even the community. And we can talk about how those things contribute to societal results, as you'll see. So that's one part of it. And then the other part is our other model, as you'll see, the 6 boxes model, is a way to organize and analyze and configure behavior influences, again, at the individual level, at the organizational or societal level. So let me explain a little bit about that and tell you what sort of how we think about this. First of all, going back to the business of being accomplishment based, Tom Gilbert, who probably almost everybody whose name I see here among the attendees, was a major pioneer in the field of performance improvement. He was, I think, a bit older than from Roger Kaufman, but he, like Roger and Gary Rumler and a handful of others, were the sort of major pioneers in the field of performance improvement, which emerged from the field of instructional technology, instructional design. And Gilbert wrote a book in 1978 called Human Competence that some of you have read, I think. And we just celebrated the 40th year of its publication, and it's still very active. It's still being studied in graduate schools and applied by lots of our colleagues. I have several copies, dog-eared and annotated. But one of the big sort of earth-shaking things that Tom said, and he was always a bit of an iconoclast, was in the great cult of behavior, and he didn't mean behaviorists, he meant leaders, managers, trainers, everybody involved with trying to help people perform. In the great cult of behavior, behavior itself is viewed as an end rather than as a means to an end. But we must enable people to produce accomplishments, the valuable products of the behavior. Now, this was a paradigm shift, and people who've been to these webinars know I've said this over and over again, but I think it's ground level key thing. And we when I got into this field almost 50 years ago, and somewhat later when I had the opportunity to learn from Tom and be mentored somewhat by him, and then by Joe Harless, who was a primary protege of his, they used the word accomplishments. And it's a brilliant word in terms of communicating to people the importance of the thing. But what I've learned in the field of performance improvement, as well as in organizational behavior management and other areas where people talk about being accomplishment based, is that the word accomplishment means a whole lot of different stuff to different people. So if you look it up, for example, in the dictionary, more of it is about the completion of behavior than the products of behavior. And if you look at our field, and if you look at published literature or presentations at conferences, you will see accomplishments defined all the way from giant organizational level business results down to the completion of behavior by individuals or teams and everything in between. So because we like to be precise and simple, we coined the term work outputs. A, because that sounds more like the product of behavior, and secondly, because it can be made, because an output sounds like a thing, like a widget coming off the end of an assembly line. So we use that as a synonym, and you'll see that phrase in our models when we're talking about accomplishments. Now, one of our core models, one of our two models is the performance chain. And again, people know about this. But of course, when you're analyzing performance at any level for a team, even when you're coaching an individual, but certainly at a societal level, organizational level, you want to understand what it is that whatever you're doing, what's at stake? What are you trying to achieve for the organization or ultimately for the society? And so there's a list of some things. Most of them are kind of organizational level things like revenue, profits, but things like safety could be extended beyond an organization into the community. Anyway, continuing from where I was, we start with the organizational results in mind, typically. And of course, as I had already mentioned, I think before things went down, that Roger Kaufman encouraged me many years ago to recognize that organizational results occur in the context of societal results, and that we really need to have those be aligned. So we always start with that in mind. We always start with the, with our purpose, what it is we're trying to affect or improve. And as I was starting to say when things went down, here's a list of some organizational or societal results. And when we talk about results at this level, we basically mean aggregates. In other words, things like profits or safety or employee engagement are generally calculated as sort of lagging indicators based on a whole bunch of other stuff. So many of these things, like employee engagement, customer satisfaction, operational efficiency, are calculated measures or indicators of the success of the whole. So anyway, the things down the right of this slide, things like voter participation, child mortality, and so forth, those are aggregate results that might be applied to a nation or a community or a society or even the whole world. So we start out with those things in mind. We value the accomplishments or the work outputs that we care about based on how they contribute to those things. And then moving from right to left, we now look at accomplishments, or as I mentioned earlier, what we describe as work outputs. And there's many kinds of those. Deliverables are very concrete things like documents or widgets. Things like decisions or relationships might be less tangible, but there's still things that we can define that are countable. We can define whether they're good or not. And they're very important outputs, for example, of senior leaders or even in community action and so forth. And so these are all the things that people, individuals, teams, groups, whole organizations maybe, but usually at the level of individuals, groups, and processes produce as a result of their behavior. And so we want to look at those, and some example of those from individual collective. On the left hand of this picture, you'll see things like PowerPoint file that meets corporate standards, or a widget that passes a stress test, or a website to go ready to go live. Those are all things that individuals might produce. But if you start looking at the right side, you see things like a summary of a presidential vote that passes audit, or a Senate with all members present ready to go, or a bill with the president's signature, or a nuclear regulatory treaty signed by all parties. Those are also outputs or accomplishments that can be defined, and can be defined as, whether they're up to par or not, and they can actually be used in the context of analyzing performance. And so then we look at the behavior for producing those. And of course, those are all verbs, and sometimes they're of individuals, but they might also be collective behavior in a variety of ways. And that's what produces things. That's what, we're alive, we behave, we produce accomplishments or work outputs that contribute to results. And finally, once we've identified those elements of performance, we can take a look at what influences them. Now, we refer to those as behavior influences. Scientific behavior scientists, people would call them probably independent variables. But these are the things that are done to try to support, develop, improve the behavior aimed at achieving work outputs or accomplishments that contribute to organizational or societal results. And the challenge with behavior influences, of course, is it's usually a very long list. And so, how do you organize those? And we'll get to that shortly. It works from left to right. Behavior influences affect or get in the way of behavior that support or do not support work outputs, that contribute or do not contribute to societal results. We analyze it from right to left. And when we do projects at any level, that's what we do, whether it's coaching an individual to help her or him improve some accomplishment in their job, or looking at some large societal or community thing. We go through the same kind of logic. Now, one of the interesting things about work outputs or accomplishments is that they connect behavior to results. In other words, for example, if I look at a decision that you've made or a document that you've made, it's probably going to be a lot easier to show a credible link between that and some organizational result or even societal result that you're seeking to contribute to than it is to say, oh, if you behave in certain ways, it's probably going to make a difference. And so it's very important to recognize this, because when you can define the work outputs or the accomplishments that need to be produced, it's a lot easier, first of all, to define the behavior needed to produce them. And it's also a lot easier to link those to the organizational or societal results. And that is engaging for humans. So it's an important point we could spend a lot of time on, but it's an important point at least worth mentioning. The behavior influences topic, though, is one of some interest, because what about that? As I often have said, it's a list from here to the next county if you take into account all the, flavors of the month. This year I was at ATD and everything is about mindset, growth mindset. That's supposedly a behavior influence. I don't know what it'll be in 2 years, but I bet it'll be different. So how do you make sense of all this? Well, this is where I go back to my behavior science background. And the brilliance of B.F. Skinner was that he didn't call them behavior influences, but he identified the things that affect behavior in terms of their function. So the top line there, SD, which is a discriminative stimulus, to use nerdy scientific jargon, is an antecedent. It's a prompt or a cue if it's actually functioning. And it makes it more likely that a response or behavior will occur. And if followed by a reinforcing stimulus, consequence, a reinforcer or a punisher, then then it makes it more likely that that behavior will occur. So what we mean by function here, and this is an important point that we'll come back to, is what these events do to behavior. That is, it defines these things in terms of the effect they have on behavior, and that's important to remember. Now, Gilbert recognized that when you move outside of the laboratory, it's kind of a different story, because unlike the basic research laboratory that Skinner's work was largely focused on, where we know that we have hungry pigeons or rats or dogs or monkeys, or even people. We know they've been deprived in some way. They want money or whatever it is. We know what their incentives are going to be. We also can control the antecedents. We also know with a rat or pigeon, certainly, we can define or create or design environmental factors, instruments, to use Gilbert's term, that are well suited to their physical capabilities. But in the world of work and with humans, that's not true. So Gilbert took Skinner's framework and divided it into these two layers. What the environment provides. The environment provides information in the form of what he called data that set expectations, provide feedback, basically. It also provides instruments, the tools, the time, the physical environments, the ventilation, the human resources, all of the things that enable the person or persons to do whatever it is we're asking them to do. And then he used the word incentives to talk about consequences that are arranged to try to increase desired behavior. But what he pointed out was that individuals carry around information too. He described it as knowledge. I think of it as a prerequisite repertoire, pre-existing repertoire. But the point is, individuals come in with different histories in terms of what they've learned. They also come in with different capacities. And when we look at all the things we ask people to do, we recognize that it takes certain characteristics to be a good accountant versus a dock worker versus a lumberjack versus a salesperson. And so one of the things we do when we select and assign people, hire people, assign them to jobs and tasks, is we look at what Gilbert called their capacity and how that matches up with the requirements of the job. And then finally, Gilbert also used the term motives, and he used that to reflect the functional definition that Skinner had for consequences. That is, we can arrange incentives for you, but if they're not things you care about, they are not going to work. So what Gilbert pointed out was we need to take individuals and groups and even cultural motives and preferences into account so that we can understand how to manage the rest of those factors, in particular incentives. So that was Gilbert's model. And I encountered it and encountered Tom Gilbert in the early 80s and was very excited about it because I, like some of the people in this that are still with us, I hope, did. We were doing training and development, basically. We were developing training programs for people, and we were implementing them. But what we recognized was that if we didn't look at the other factors in the top part of that box or that model, that we probably weren't going to get much return on investment. That we could teach people until we were blue in the face, but if we didn't set different expectations and provide feedback, if we didn't give them environmental factors that would support the new performance, if we didn't give them incentives for doing the new thing, it wasn't going to have much of an effect. And so I was really excited about this, and the teams of people that I was managing and bringing into consulting projects, we were all kind of nerdy performance improvement people. But what we recognized when we began to partner with our stakeholders and clients was that they didn't get it. Data, like what are you talking about? Databases or spreadsheets? What do you mean? Or instruments, depending on their field. Is that an ohm meter or a personality assessment tool, or what is that? So in the early 80s, I began to tweak the language. And by about 1986, after having tested this language with a lot of ordinary people, we came up with this framework. And we still always pay homage to Tom Gilbert for having given us the conceptual framework. But a few years later, in the early 90s, I was struggling what to call this. And Tom Hogan, who was a senior salesperson and then head of sales training at Dun & Bradstreet, said, I was talking about those boxes, so why don't you call it the 6 boxes? So we did. So this introduced us in a way to the notion that plain English can be a powerful enhancer of communication and collaboration. And that's how we frame behavior influences. Because in 50 years of consulting and based on all behavior science that I know, I have not found a single thing that affects behavior that won't fit into this framework. It's a complete system. And whether you think about a thing and sort of deconstruct it and say which of the cells it fits into, or sometimes it's more than one cell. For example, trust tends to be the relationship between expectations and following up by providing resources and recognizing people's performance with consequences. You can analyze anything you can do for performance into this framework. So it is a complete system. And it's not just categorical, it's actually a system. And we don't have time to do this, but you can show how every single one of those cells connects to and needs to be aligned with others. A few examples. Expectations and feedback in box 1 have to be aligned with consequences, because if I ask you to do something and you do it and nothing good ever happens, you're probably not going to keep doing it. Or for example, tools and resources. If we give somebody a new tool or resource, probably we want to be sure they have the skills and knowledge in box 4 to use it. And the flip side of that is sometimes we can give people a tool like a job aid and enable them to develop skills without explicit training. Or selection and assignment, box 5. When we select people for jobs or roles or tasks, we want to be real clear what the expectations are for that job, because we're not going to select them very well, and so on. So every single one of these cells links to everyone else. So it's a system, and it's a functional system. And we're going to talk about that and how it applies. Now, one of the things that Gilbert talked about was the worth of an intervention. And this is especially related to training, but it's related to everything else too. What he said was, if you're going to intervene with performance in some ways, the worth of that intervention is going to be equal to the value of the work outputs or accomplishments that it enables people to produce more of or better of, divided by the cost to support that behavior. So he pointed out behavior is a cost. And it's not like we want to have slaves, and not pay them anything, but we want to optimize the conditions for supporting the behavior to produce the work outputs in order to have the most worthy, if you will, or worthwhile interventions. Now, in current terminology, that's return on investment. So what we would say is that if we're trying to optimize the return on investment in any kind of intervention, we want to be sure that we've defined and supported people's ability to produce valuable work outputs that contribute to organizational and societal results. And we want to optimize the cost by arranging conditions to support that performance as efficiently and effectively as possible. So here's a generic job aid. This is probably one of the oldest things I have in my filing system. We created the first version of this back in the 80s. And it's an effort, it's probably rather small text for you. You're gonna have to look at the details, but this is as well as we could summarize at a kind of a high level, all the factors, the positive behavior influences that ought to be in place if you're gonna try to optimize some kind of performance. And so that's a kind of a generic one in the sense that you can apply this in various ways and talk about specific ways of setting expectations aligned with consequences or specific workflow designs or what have you. Now, as a sort of a footnote, but it's also relevant to this talk, some of our colleagues claim that this model and Tom Gilbert's model only applies to individual performers, but I beg to differ. In fact, some of my colleagues, Carol Panza is one of the longest going ones. We've known each other for decades, and she's worked at the high-end organizational level, and she always says, no, that's not true. 6 boxes applies at any level in an organization. Because first of all, here's a kind of a Gary Rumler type of picture. If we're looking at a system that not only has in the middle there any business with all its various departments, but also the resources from the outside, the customers, the market, the business environment, there's all those little people out there. And so to the extent that performance is happening, people are behaving. And so the notion that that somehow it doesn't apply to a larger system doesn't work, because we can arrange conditions to set expectations for people, to give them feedback, to enable them with tools at any level you want to talk about. And then the second thing is exactly that, behavior influences. For example, the first one in the upper left-hand corner, the Constitution. That is a big expectation setting thing for the Supreme Court, for legislators, for policymakers, for a whole bunch of other people. And feedback related to that is important. Or for example, stock market data analyses that probably some of you like me look at pretty often. Those are explicit, high level, organizational level, or rather societal level, really, behavior influences on my performance as well as the whole market. And you can go through all of these things as examples and see that there are behavior influences that can be put in place at kind of any level that do potentially function to change or impact behavior. So I would like to argue that this set of models can be applied at any level, and I want to get into it a little bit. And so from a mega point of view, getting back to the topic that we sort of started out with Dr. Kaufman's contribution, how can this help with mega? Well, first of all, accomplishments can be defined at whatever level we want. They're countable outcomes, but they can certainly be connected up to societal results. And secondly, the 6 boxes model gives us a framework. It makes us less likely that we'll miss critical factors that affect performance. For example, expectations without consequences, or lousy tools, or the absence of motives. It suggests additional factors because of all those links that I showed you, so that you're more likely to come up with a complete, effective solution. And it's based on functional variables. And this is a point I was making earlier. It's not just categories of stuff. It's actually categories of things that are related to behavior in terms of the effect they have on behavior. And therefore, it's inherently systemic. And finally, we think it offers a methodology or a framework for designing mega performance systems. So let's take a look at public safety. And again, I'm no expert. I'm simply trying to suggest that if we take this kind of a performance system perspective, we may be able to do a better job in configuring solutions. And of course, this is a hot topic, but you might notice that I have a picture of a very nice looking woman, person of color, in her uniform in front of a police car, rather than a black male being killed at the curbside. Because although those are the issues that are brought to the general world's attention, and probably every one of us has watched optimize public safety, we have to take the kind of positive orientation that sort of this woman's smile reflects. And also, this is not political. I'm not trying to make some political point. I'm trying to say if we take a systemic approach, we can make a difference. So there's a couple things that literally do drive me crazy every day. And I don't just mean with respect to public safety or societal issues. The first one, and many of you in this group I'm sure can relate, is training is the solution. So, your salespeople are not performing so well, or there's a problem with customer service, or we're having a trouble, managing our social network business. Well, you ought to train them some more. Well, that's just, one of the things we've seen over decades in organizations is it doesn't work. And of course, I was looking for a picture of mayors or police chiefs telling us that they were going to retrain their police people, but I realized they didn't want to point fingers, because it's the generic issue. But I'm sure probably everybody that's watching this has seen television bits, certainly back during the periods when there have been egregious sort of misbehavior in the public safety realm, of policemen and mayors getting them saying, well, we're going to retrain our police officers, as though that would really make a difference. And so this is actually what prompted me to get into this topic back quite a while ago now, almost a year ago, when George Floyd was murdered, that this is the message that was coming up. We're going to train them. And this drives me as crazy in the societal benefit world as it does in the customer service department. It is not the solution. Because, for example, this just is something I'd pull off the web from Grand Rapids, but as they pointed out, well-trained police following proper procedures are still going to be arresting people for mostly low-level offenses, and the burden will continue to fall primarily on communities of color, because that's how the system's designed to operate, not because of the biases or misunderstandings of officers. Now, this may not be a blanket statement that you would agree with or disagree with, but the point is, even the folks that are in that part of the world, in the world of public safety, recognize, push comes to shove, that training is probably not going to do it. Work in organizations is that if we just do stuff down in that skills and knowledge box, that we are not going to get any kind of reasonable return on investment. Training is expensive. It's expensive to design it, to deliver it, and it takes people out of their workplace, and that is costly. And if we do not set new expectations, provide feedback, design processes, workflow, tools, and environmental supports and human resources as well to support our desired performance. If we don't have consequences and incentives, and I mean positive ones, I don't just mean punishment. If we don't select people appropriately for what it is we're trying to accomplish, and if we don't line up with the motives and preferences that in this case, our society cares about, it's not going to work. And it doesn't work in companies, and it's not going to work at a social, societal level. So one of the challenges is, and this is the second thing that drives me nuts, is people start just listing stuff. And so there's a really lot of smart people out there who've been talking about how we can change our public safety system, how we can improve it. And so there's just a short list of some of those things. And they talk about best practices. The phrase best practices originated, I believe, in the medical world. And then it got applied in education, and now it's discussed in public safety. And there's a lot of best practices out there. But any one best practice, so-called, is not going to solve the problem because it is not a system. And so, again, in organizations and companies, when I look at things like sales enablement or customer service, and I see the failures there, it's exactly the same thing. People are doing a bunch of stuff, but they don't have a framework to put it all together. By the way, we're clearly going to go over the hour, and I apologize for that because of the internet problem. So policymakers at the level of societal issues, they don't have a completeness framework. They don't have a way to think about what a system, that is a performance system, would involve or would require to change the performance we're trying to get. Now, here's another thing that I will make available to you, you might find interesting. Oops. Oh, I think I just deleted it by mistake, which I apologize for. But I can send it out to you. This is a document. You could actually find this. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I hit the wrong. Let me see if that's true. Yeah, darn. Okay, well, I hit the wrong. I'm a little bit shaken up by the internet problem here. This is a document. You can probably look for a new era of public safety. But it's a great document. It has a whole lot of best practices collected in a whole lot of different categories from a lot of people who've been looking at these issues. And it's a great document. But it's still not a system. It still does not comprise a system because a collection of evidence-based practices does not necessarily comprise a system. It may be missing pieces. And so what I would like to encourage in this conversation is that to look at all of the things that could be done to support public safety, think about their function in terms of how they will affect behavior and whose behavior they will affect, and then configure those. So this is just a visual that I use sometimes, but I think it's, in a way, telling. It's the silos picture. And these are some things that my friend Caleb gave me as a list among several lists. But these are a bunch of things that are components of a larger system that is intended to try to manage public safety. Juvenile justice and diversion programs, policing and investigations, school and community programs, criminal justice, victims, crime support and feedback, etc. I mean, the list could go on and on. These are all components of a larger system, but they don't hang together. They're just in silos. And so let's, at a very simple level, begin to apply the logic of performance thinking to this. The first thing is if you say we're talking about public safety, now there's a lot of accomplishments or outputs we would talk about, but I think bottom line, what we're looking for is people who feel safe and actually are safe, both outside their homes and businesses, in the neighborhood, in the community, in the city, and inside their homes. Nobody's going to break into their house, be they, uniformed public servants or criminals. And so those are a couple of major accomplishments we could define. And again, I'm not claiming to be complete in this analysis, but those are a couple of ways to frame what it is we're trying to produce as major outputs. And here's some sub-accomplishments or some sub-outputs. First of all, timely and effective responses to issues that are not just criminal activity, psychosocial emergencies, things like domestic violence, substance abuse, and so forth. Response by people that are qualified in a timely and effective manner. Timely and effective responses, of course, to criminal activity. If somebody's breaking into a business or house, there needs to be a quick response, and it needs to be appropriate response. One of the things is that most of these things, or many of these things in the public safety domain, go through the 911 operator. And so a more effective process and decision tree that actually routes people to the appropriate resources, not just always to the policeman, but to the social worker, to the domestic violence specialist, to whoever it is, who may then accompany police or handle these things solo. Another one that seems really critical, and I'm sure everybody has read about community policing over the years. I was living in Boston when it was a thing in New York and Boston, and it was early on shown to be effective. But community policing really is about establishing human relationships between uniformed public servants and young people, old people, business owners, families in the neighborhood. If you don't have those, if the only thing going on is a car goes by with a badge on it and flashing lights, and people show up with guns and armor, and they're bad people with guns, this ain't going to happen. And so the notion of developing day-to-day positive relationships is another output. Now, this list could go on, but it is not an infinite list, and people who know better than I could create a list which would begin to define the accomplishments that we need in order to achieve reliable public safety. Then we can begin to look at, and this is the thing that was in the PDF that I suggested you download, we can begin to look at some of those behavior influences. So for example, in box 1, this is just a few things, but policies aligned with the community's standards for public safety, for outcomes, for behavior. How are we supposed to behave around here? Well-established, communicated, promulgated expectations, repeatedly set. Also leaders, whether it's mayors and police chiefs, but more importantly, senior police officers and mentors and trainers and people in the FBI and people in social work and all these folks leading by example and setting consistent expectations of appropriate behavior. Expectations consistently set, not just said once and then forgotten, but as we see in big companies, same deal, repeatedly set and confirmed. A big one in the public safety world is union contracts, because unions have gotten themselves into a position now where they can essentially protect uniformed public servants from being from accountability, so-called qualified immunity. There needs to be a change in that. There needs to be a different expectation there, one way or the other. Values and practices that are positive, that are part of the community standard about how we're supposed to treat one another, embedded in communications, in meetings, and activities all the way. A big one is frictionless mechanisms and process for feedback. That's the expectations. I'm sorry, this should say expectations and feedback, shouldn't it? It's mislabeled. Expectations and feedback from citizens about what's working, not next month, but now. Public posting of data. That's the transparency thing people talk about. Now, this list can go on, but the thing is, again, I apologize, I must have looked at this 10 times when I did this. It should say expectations and feedback, but the notion is that these kinds of things serve the function of expectations and feedback for the people involved in public safety. We can go to tools and resources then, and that includes everything from process designs, like how 911 calls are routed, and job designs, and how things like mentorship and training is done in terms of the way they're designed, to technology solutions, to apps that are helpful, to supervisors who are human resources who actually coach individual employees appropriately rather than setting bad models. A big one that, of course, everybody's talking about when they talk about allocating funds in cities, professionals from other disciplines that are available, that are ready to work and address some of these topics. When you look at tools and resources as a category, one of the things I've observed over the decades is that when we talk to people in organizations about the 6 boxes, if we're talking to educators, who are public servants, basically, in most cases, you see that they are terribly deprived. And so the biggest issue for many educators is they don't have the tools and resources. Well, I would say that's the same thing in terms of public safety. I think everybody will probably agree to that there are not sufficient resources for housing, for social work, for all of these things. And there's no magic bullet for that. That's part of what has to be discussed around these issues by civic organizations, cities, towns, states, you name it. So the point is there's a bunch of tools and resources to put in place to make this happen. And then there are consequences and incentives. And that's not just punishment. It needs to be frequent, visible recognition and rewards for people who do it right. Better pay. Uniformed public servants should not be making more money just by doing bazillion overtime hours. They should be making more money by demonstrating the best way to do things, best practices. They should get salary increases and promotions based on that. Also, specific incentives can be arranged to reward engagement with community members. That's how some of the community policing programs work. And also immediate response to inappropriate behavior. That has to be possible. And legislation, probably, to prevent union contracts that unfairly protect people. So those are just some examples. Some of them are a little politically charged, but again, you can think about this functionally in terms of what are the positive consequences in recognition, not just financial or punishment, but all the other stuff that would support appropriate behavior. Skills and knowledge. Yes, we're not talking about not training, but first of all, training is not the only way you get skills and knowledge. For example, the second bullet here, modeling and mentorship by individuals. That's not formal training. That's who's riding along with you and who's modeling and showing you how to do stuff. The classic thing that's said about the American public safety system is that uniformed public servants, policemen so-called, are trained with greater depth in a lot of other countries and much more. So that's probably a need for higher quality education and training. For example, exposure and engagement of uniformed public servants to community members. This is, I think, at the core of community policing. It's not just we ride through the neighborhood in our car. We actually get out and play basketball with the kids. We actually get to know the business people. There are relationships there, but there's also part of the skill and knowledge that comes out of that is compassion, empathy, recognition that it's not us against them, and so forth. So there's a lot of things that can be done in the skills and knowledge category, but it's not just about training. Box 5, really clearly stated expectations about how we hire people in the various roles in public safety. Now, the second bullet is sort of my favorite, and it's probably too simplistic. But I've always thought there's an awful lot of former military people in various police ranks around the country, from what I've read at least. And I've always thought that if you're going to hire military people, how about hire ex-Coast Guards people? Because people get in the Coast Guards to help. They don't get in because they want to go to war. They go because they want to help. And the same thing with firemen. So think about those profiles as being the profile. You want people who are incredibly courageous and very brave because they put their lives at stake, but not like Navy SEALs, like Coast Guardsmen who are saving people out in horrible weather. So the whole thing about how we select and assign people based on the expectations for how we want them to behave and what their values are have got to be important. Finally, motives and preferences. We need to explicitly, in a social, cultural, town, city, community environment, express the values, the motives that we care about, and we want to align the people that we hire and the processes and all the rest of it with those things. Things like being able to say, this is not about using weapons, it's about finding ways to use positive solutions instead of weapons, if possible. If that, rather than shoot first, ask questions later, is the motive and preference, there's got to be the possibility of at least moving the dial a little bit. So these are just examples, and they're not intended to be a solution, but you can begin to use this framework to configure the things and continuously improve the things to support the performance we care about that's aligned with community values. And so just to summarize, to stand back, and again, I'm not an authority, I'm just trying to offer this way of thinking possibly to groups of people who haven't thought about it that way. Mostly not you all, because you already do, most of the people who are in this session right now, but we will have a recorded version of this and we hope to be able to pass it on. What we're suggesting is a couple of big things. If we want to address societal issues, whether this is public safety one or things like hunger or homelessness, whatever it is, we have to identify, first of all, the desired accomplishments, what it is concretely that we want people, individuals, groups, processes to produce. And then we want to coordinate and implement systems of interventions that function together to support the behavior of individuals, groups, or processes. And then we want to adjust those over time. In other words, we want to take a systematic performance improvement approach to these big issues, because we will not succeed if there are missing elements or if there are factors that are disconnected from this performance system. The 6 boxes model gives you a very simple framework for that has its roots in behavior science. It's not airy-fairy, it's not made up. And so this framework, I believe, for civic leaders, for policymakers, for people trying to configure conditions to address aspects of public safety, homelessness, you name it, can be very helpful. So that's sort of the summary of really what I'd like to say. A couple of things, and then I want to see if people want to talk or text. We're going to do our Summer Institute. It's been put last time. And then here's some things for more information. We have our performance consulting practitioner program. We do open one every few months. The next one starts January 11th, and you can find the information for that on our website. So that's the end, I believe. So I wonder, does anybody have anything they'd like to suggest? I'm looking at Caleb's comment. Law enforcement culture should embrace a guardian rather than a warrior mindset to build trust and legitimacy. Beautiful, Caleb. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's kind of the selection and assignment thing, the values part. It is, Brigitte, being recorded. We're gonna. It got it got interrupted several times because of internet failures, and so I think we will be able to have our editor piece it together into a whole thing. Anybody else have anybody still with us that has comments, questions, observations about any of this? Or maybe I can ask you a question. Do you think this is substantive? Do you think that what I've had to say here, which is very superficial because it wasn't a lot of time, do you think, oh, you never wrote that comment? That's very funny. Yeah, I think we can approach these kinds of issues. And of course, I would like to, once this is recorded, I would like to pass this on to civic leaders and such, in the hopes that maybe one or two will try it out. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Anybody else? Thanks for that link, Caleb, by the way. I think that's the report that I screwed up on, if I'm not mistaken. I will also, when we post this, I'll put the link to that document on YouTube so that people can get to that link. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Sorry for the hiccups here. This has been quite a challenge. It's my 72nd birthday, so I was excited to do this on my birthday, and I still am happy to have done it. But it's been a bit of a ride between the internet and other things. But I appreciate your having shown up. So I think that's probably the end. Thank you so much.